Your worth is not your LinkedIn. It's not your job title. It's not your salary and not your promotion and not how productive you were this week and not how many people think that you're doing well. And yet, so many of us live like this. We introduce ourselves through what we do. I'm in marketing. Uh, I am a lawyer. I work in tech. I have a business. Or I'm still figuring things out, you know. And somehow, the last one feels the heaviest, the hardest to say. Because we live in a world where performance has become personality, where being busy means being productive. It looks important, where burnout gets mistaken for ambition, where resting too much feels like laziness. And slowly, without even realizing it, we start believing that our worth has to be earned and that being productive makes us valuable and that being successful makes us being more lovable, and that if we slow down or we fall behind or take too long to figure life out, we somehow become less. I think this pressure starts much earlier than adulthood, especially in Indian homes. Good marks, good behavior, being the responsible one, being the sensible child, uh, being praised for adjusting, you know, like you are appreciated for performing well, for not creating problems, for being useful, for making people proud. And those things aren't bad, but sometimes without meaning to, love feels like uh, it feels like it's being connected to achievement. You know, you begin to feel like being valuable means being useful, being appreciated means being exceptional, being safe means being needed, and that kind of belief follows you into adulthood. You know, it just changes shape. Now it sounds like, what's your job title? How much is your salary? What do you earn? When are you getting married? Are you buying a house? What are your future plans? When are you having kids? What are you doing next? Sometimes these questions are asked so casually, but they land in a very heavy manner because suddenly your life starts feeling like a progress report. You know, it reminds you of school days. It's like a mark sheet. And if you're not moving fast enough, achieving enough, or looking successful enough, you start questioning yourself. Am I behind? Am I wasting time? Am I enough if I'm not constantly achieving? And that is such a kind of quiet pressure that is there all the time, but it doesn't look dramatic. And sometimes it just feels like guilt on a slow day, or anxiety when you are resting, or the strange feeling that you need to earn softness, that even peace has to be deserved. I think that's why rest feels uncomfortable for so many people. Not because we don't want it, but because stillness brings questions. If I'm not producing, what worth am I? You know, if I'm not helping, what do I offer? If I am not succeeding, who am I? That that is such a hard thing to sit with because we've been taught to build identity around output, not around self. Uh, we know how to answer what do you do, but not always who are you when you are not performing. Who are you when no one is impressed? Who are you when life is messy or uncertain and slow? because those answers feel a less obvious. They do not fit neatly into a bio. They do not show up on LinkedIn. And but honestly, I feel like they matter more. I think one of the clearest signs that we confuse worth with usefulness is how we treat ourselves during the phases when we cannot perform. There could be burnout, there could be illness, there could be heartbreak, unemployment, grief, depression. And these are the phases where life is begging you to slow down, is begging you to pause. And suddenly, in those moments, people feel ashamed. And not just because they are struggling, but because they feel less valuable while they are struggling, as if needing help makes them harder to love, as if slowing down makes them less worthy. And that kind of belief runs very deep, but if your value disappears the moment you stop performing, you have to know that that was never real worth. That was simply usefulness. And usefulness is not the same thing as worth. You can be deeply valuable and still be tired. You can be worthy and still be uncertain. You can deserve love while being messy, healing, unproductive, and unfinished. And that should not feel radical. But for a lot of people, it does. So then the real question is, if performance is how we should measure worth, then is if performance is not how we should measure worth, then how should we measure worth? And I think the answer is something very simple. It's less visible, it's less impressive, but it's a lot more human. Maybe worth should be measured in how you treat people when there is nothing to gain, in your honesty, in your kindness, in your integrity, and in how safe people feel around you, in how you handle power, in your ability to take responsibility, in your willingness to keep trying, in how you show up for yourself and for others, not perfectly, just sincerely. And maybe worth is not how productive you are, but how deeply you live, how present you are, how well you listen, how gently you hold yourself and others. These things do not get any form of any kind of applause. They do not trend. They don't make to family WhatsApp groups, but they matter. Actually, I think they matter a lot more because titles change, success shifts, people lose jobs, uh, plans fail, life becomes uncertain. And if your entire personality is built around identity, work identity, and performance, every setback is going to feel like a personal failure. But if your worth is rooted somewhere deeper, like somewhere internal, life becomes a little less fragile. You can lose a role without losing yourself. You can fail at something without believing that you are a failure. And that changes everything. And I want to be clear that this doesn't mean that ambition is bad or wanting to be successful is wrong. Working hard is not wrong, and being proud of what you have worked on or what you have built is beautiful. The problem starts when achievement becomes your only language of self respect and self worth. When rest feels like guilt, where love feels like conditional, when you can't separate your humanity from your output, that is where it hurts. And I think a lot of us are trying to unlearn this in real time. And we're trying to remind ourselves that we are allowed to exist outside of productivity, and we are allowed to be loved outside of ordinary phases. You know, we are allowed to be enough before the big promotion, before the glow up, and before everything is figured out. And that work is slow because beliefs around worth do not change overnight. They change through repetition and through small moments where you choose not to abandon yourself, without where you rest without apology, and you ask for help without shame, and you stop speaking to yourself like a disappointed manager. So, where you let your life be human and not optimized. And I feel like that is where real healing begins, you know, and it's not in becoming more impressive, it's in becoming more honest, and in remembering that your value was never supposed to depend on how well you perform. It was always there before all the achievements came into the picture, before the approvals, before the LinkedIn title, before the versions of you that looked successful enough. They were there, and they are still there now, even on messy days, even when you are behind, even when you are resting, even when no one is clapping. Your worth is not your performance. It never was. If this is something that resonated with you, tell me in the comments, and I will see you next time.